came in and he changed some of it. He still allowed some of the privatization, but they were still controlling the markets, but you had to go through the actual government first to get those contracts to go through, and that's how a lot of the bribery and these oligarch situations came about.
Yeah, essentially, and then Yeltsin wanted to privatize it, essentially, in the end.
But he still kept control within the government.
Yeah, but and his plan to do so was to sell off all the state-owned enterprises, which was a vast amount of wealth. And so he just had every Russian citizen was given a voucher, and I can't remember how much it was, so that they could buy stock in these now privatized companies. But because of inflation and because of just the end of the Soviet Union, a lot of people lost their pensions and were flat broke. Almost everybody that was an ordinary citizen sold their vouchers for pennies on the dollar. And so they wound up all in the hands of these quote-unquote oligarchs. But wound up owning everything.
And this is why Yeltsin was so unpopular by the end of '99.
Yeah.
Because the economy is just in the toilet.
Well, it is. I mean, all these people have basically grabbed all the wealth. Meantime, the economy's in the toilet. The GDP dropped 50%.
That's pretty significant.
Nobody had any money. Everybody was flat broke and unemployed. And Yeltsin was not popular. So that's a situation, and
so that's when he then brings Putin in.
So he appointed Putin. He was, I think, his third prime minister in a pretty brief amount of time, and then just right after that, a month later, September 1999, September 4th, a very, very large bomb went off in an apartment building in the city of, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but it's like Boynast. I mean, this is the former Soviet Union, so you've seen those pictures of those enormous concrete block apartments.
Yeah, literally a block.
Yeah, exactly.
City block.
Yeah, so that whole thing got blown up, and a lot of people were killed, and surprisingly, nobody took credit for the explosion, and it certainly didn't seem to be an accident. It looked like a deliberate bombing. And then 4 days later, on September 9th, another apartment block was blown up, this time in Moscow, and then another one blew up on September 13th. On September 16th, an apartment building in the city of Volgodonsk was bombed. And in all, 293 people were killed, and more than 1,000 were wounded or maimed.
In these four separate bombings.
Yeah, and everybody in Russia was scared. It was like, terror on a mass scale, and nobody knew who it was that was doing it. And then on September 14th, another bomb was found and defused in Moscow. Apparently a couple more were found around this time, but I'm uncertain as to the exact dates. And then on September 22nd, another large bomb was found in the basement of an apartment block in the city of Ryazan. It was defused before it could go off. And in this case, there were witnesses who actually saw the guys who likely planted the bomb. And I'm not sure if they saw them actually, bringing it in or running away, or if they were just the guys who came by and rented the basement space, or maybe all three. Because most of these spaces, people came in and rented space, and then trucked in all the materials for the bombs and put them all together, and then left. But in this case, they had some faces, they had descriptions. And very shortly, every vertical surface in the city of Ryazan was covered with wanted posters with drawings of these guys. But still, the motive for the bombings was unclear until the FSB and the Russian government said that there was what is quote-unquote a Chechen trail, unquote. And that the bombings were almost certainly the work of Chechen terrorists or Dagestani terrorists. I mean, it's a very complicated situation over there. And Chechnya is kind of like, at least about half of Chechnya is almost in anarchy, and there's all sorts of guerrilla groups going around.
And the dog jumped over something.
Dagestan are operating in Chechnya, and people from Chechnya are operating in Dagestan. And
so for a quick bit of geographic reference for people who may not know where Chechnya is, because I didn't. I mean, I know the name of the country, but I'd never really logged it in my brain where the heck it was.
Yeah.
It's about 1,000 miles directly north of Iran. It's in that neck of the woods.
Yeah.
So just to kind of give you an idea, I mean, when it's a country that the Russian Federation is going to war with, I expect it to be in the far north reaches for some reason.
No, it's
so that's why
it's on the southern flank.
Yeah,
it is. And there's been more than one Chechen war between them and them. So
This is the second one.
yeah, it is. This is right about. This is what kind of set off the Second Chechen War. And remember Vladimir Putin? He now the Prime Minister. He gave a really tough-sounding speech at a press conference, and he ordered the air bombing of Grozny, Chechnya, and that was the beginning of the Second Chechen War. And of course, that was actually ordered by Yeltsin, but Putin was the one who actually gave the order.
So he looked like the hero.
Yeah.
He's defending the Russian people from terrorists.
Yeah.
Much like a certain man in this country a decade or so ago did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or like, Putin is still doing to this day.
Yeah.
Suddenly, Vladimir Putin was a star. His popularity went up hugely. Yeah, I didn't mention this before, but there was a presidential election scheduled for the very next year, 2000, and when Boris Yeltsin saw that Putin was riding so high in the polls, Putin, of course, was his buddy, he decided, he was at the time polling about 2% approval rating.
Which is basically none.
So he decided to abdicate in favor of Putin. So he resigned at the end of December 1999, December 31st. Putin took over as president, and guess what? He's still there. I mean, he did swap with the prime minister for one short term before he came back in as president again, and I assume that arrangement's going to go on indefinitely.
This is a dumb question.
Yeah.
He's not elected.
No, he's elected.
He is?
Yeah.
Do people run against him?
Well,
on paper.
Yeah, they do. They do. I mean, no, they do have sort of real elections, I guess.
There's all kinds of accusations of tampering. I mean, it was.
Oh yeah.
I think it was in the 2010-ish range where he had an election where he was trailing massively in the polls and then won by some huge margin. I mean, so there's all kinds of accusations of funny business, but the thing is that this second Chechen war has begun just before the election, and because he's now the star, he just totally takes it.
Yeah,
massively.
Yeah, which works out well for Boris Yeltsin, but more on that later.
Well, it works out pretty good for Putin too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So there you have it, the mysterious Russian apartment bombings of 1999, and there's several theories out there as to who did it and why.
Okay.
First theory, the CIA. This theory does not have a lot of support. There's only one guy who's put it out there, and he was actually sort of accused of being one of the men who organized the transportation of explosives to Moscow for those bombings. His name was Adam Dukeshev. He actually doesn't cite any evidence, so this theory that doesn't really have legs. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's pretty convenient.
Yeah.
Throw something against the wall, see if it sticks.
Yeah. The CIA, FBI, NSA. I don't know.
We haven't blamed them in a while, yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, okay. So we'll put that theory to bed. Next one is, and this is a favorite with the Russian government, which is Chechen warlords, or rather I should say Dagestani warlords who are based in Chechnya. Just about a month before the bombings, a Chechen-based group called the Islamic International Brigade invaded the Soviet Republic of Dagestan in support of Dagestan separatists.
A quick note here for everybody is Chechnya is an Islamic nation.
Yeah.
And not everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But that's their religion.
Yeah,
so that's where this is going.
Yeah,
that's what this is based in.
Yeah, a lot of Wahhabi Islam there actually, which is the brand that's promoted by Saudi Arabia. So it's a pretty what's the word I'm thinking of?
Large?
Well, it's
widespread religion?
It's widespread, but it's also a very strict sort of interpretation of Islam.
Oh, okay.
It's not like it's not like the kind of the interpretation of Islam that you see in, say, Indonesia. Where people are a lot more relaxed about things. It's like it's a kind of harsh interpretation of it.
It's also just societal.
Yeah. Well, okay, but back to Dagestan and Chechnya. The Russian army, of course, put this incursion down hard, and they wound up going into Chechnya also, doing a little bombing. And of course, people were killed. Lots of things were broken. And reportedly, one of the leaders of the IIB, that's the Islamic International Brigade, whose name was Ibn al-Khattab, vowed vengeance against Russia, saying, quote, the Mujahideen of Dagestan are going to carry out reprisals in various places in Russia, unquote. But then 2 weeks later, he walked that back. Al-Khattab denied that his people carried out the bombings. He said that he was fighting the Russian army and not women and children. And so, he's made conflicting statements here. But he denies that they had involvement with it. And I'm kind of, generally speaking, when terrorists carry out an operation like this, they're very happy to take credit for it.
Yeah. Even
Yeah.
sometimes when they didn't actually do it.
Yeah,
If it benefits them, they'll say, "Oh no, we did it."
we totally did it. Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
I feel like we hear that a lot on the radio or in the news these days, where they'll say there was this bombing, and these 5
17
organizations
organizations
have said that we did it, and they
Uh-huh.
are vaguely maybe connected in one way or another, but it's kind of like everyone's claiming it, and it's like, well, okay, it's one thing to say, yeah, we're gonna get back at you, Russia, with everything we have. And then to like see this horror that isn't, that was kind of an attack on civilians.
Oh, yeah.
And women and children, and to say like, no, we didn't. That's not us though. Like we want to get back at you, Russia, but we want to get back at you within like the rules of the Geneva Code or rules of warfare or whatever. Within reason, right?
Yeah, maybe.
I just don't think I can't imagine that they would have done this and then not taking credit for it.
Well, they had. It was interesting. And this kind of has some relevance to our next theory, which is that they did it with gear that they didn't necessarily have access to. Certain explosives, like HDX and a certain timer that's standard Soviet or Russian Army issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing, I mean, I have a lot of qualms with the activities that go on in Chechnya under the rule of the Russian Federation. I mean, because the Islamic religion gets blamed for a lot of stuff and is always deemed as the terror group, when in fact it's a religion, and all religions are full of good people and bad people.
No, sure.
And so this whole it's going to be the Chechen warlords thing bothers me, because I feel bad for what is probably primarily a group of normal, nice people just getting this huge label slapped on them by Putin, who's dancing the victory dance going, look at me, I found the bad people that you didn't know were here and I'm taking them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly there's a lot of people who aren't terrorists who just happen to be living in a village that's going to get the crap bombed out of it, and it's kind of sad for them.
Mm-hmm. Not unlike, a lot of other places in the Mideast, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fear-mongering. I mean, this whole, we're going to go to war against these people because they're terrible, is fear-mongering that we see in a lot of political organizations in this day and age,
absolutely.
Unfortunately, and Islam is always the one that the finger is pointed at. Yeah.
But it changes every
I mean,
decades.
it really does, and it's asinine.
So, but you mentioned that there was some kind of equipment
Detonator standard issue Russian Army. Yeah.
Okay, so
well, that's the bomb that they defused in Ryazan.
So maybe it
that's
was the government.
So what's the next theory?
Another theory is
maybe
that it was the Russian government.
Maybe jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams.
Yeah, of course it does. What are you saying? Yeah. An American journalist, I saw this guy online giving a talk. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
David Satter?
Yeah, David Satter. Yeah, Satter. Yeah, he spent a lot of time living in Russia, speaks Russian, and has been covering Russia for a long time. He traveled to Ryazan years after the incident and spoke to a lot of residents and also to the police. And believe it or not, nobody there that he talked to believes that Chechen terrorists or Dagestani terrorists or anybody planted the bombs.
Well, but there's also, I mean, there's the stuff about the guy who was ID'd and on the posters.
Yeah.
What was the...
Yeah, and so the building superintendent who rented him the space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he described him, and they did a police sketch of the guy and everything, and the guy had presented IDs, if I recall correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was hauled in by the FSB, and they basically said, "No, you saw this guy." and so yeah, that was all.
And
changed.
that guy was he was a Karachi.
Yeah, something like that. He was one of those there's a huge patchwork of ethnicities in that part of the world. So essentially, yeah. So there's that, and of course I talked to you about Yeltsin and his distinct lack of popularity. And since elections were coming up, Boris and his entourage were legitimately scared of what was going to happen to them if he gave up power. So a lot of people were expecting that Yeltsin would find some excuse to declare martial law and postpone the elections or cancel the elections. And it seems like that was his only option, unless he can install somebody in the presidency who was an ally who would protect him. So that was it. Otherwise, Yeltsin would He probably been murdered or imprisoned or God knows what. That's how unpopular he was. I mean,
Yeah.
in America and in the West, I mean, Yeltsin's actually got high approval ratings. But really, the guy was so corrupt that he was just immensely unpopular.
And I was going to ask you to explain what it is, because you've said several times he was corrupt, and that you were going to explain it. So tell me, what is it that he did that makes you say that he was that corrupt?
Well, I think corruption is kind of endemic there, but I think one of the things is that his oligarch buddies who managed to come into possession of just about all the wealth in Russia were his pals. You know, I think that's one thing that people really were a little upset by.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it was known direct associates of his were suddenly very rich people.
Yeah, and Yeltsin wasn't the only corrupt guy in Russia.
Oh no, that's just systemic to that entire governance.
Yeah, and I'm not saying there's no corruption here in America either. But,
No, we are perfect.
Yeah.
America.
Merca.
Well, back to the city of Ryazan. Remember, that's where the bomb was found that didn't go off, that was defused. That where the main ingredient in the bomb was like RDX, and there was a Russian army issue detonator on it. There were pictures out there that have been seen by people. And I also said that there were sketches of the bombing suspects all over town, and the city had been sealed up by police. In the days after the apartment bomb had been discovered, a telephone operator overheard a conversation between somebody in the city and a phone number in Moscow. And the man at the Ryazan end of the line was saying, quote, "The city is sealed and we're trapped. What should we do?" unquote. And then the voice at the other end said, "Split up and leave the city one by one. Do what you can," unquote. And the phone operator went to the police and reported this and gave them the phone number in Moscow. And when Ryazan police called that number, it turns out it was FSB headquarters. So, oops. The guys who had made the phone call didn't succeed in escaping. They were arrested by the police, and they turned out to all have FSB identifications on them. So that doesn't look so good. A little confusion there.
And how are, clarify for me again, how are they tied back to the bombings?
Well, because they were the ones who witnesses had said had either rented space in the basement or were seen trucking stuff in the apartment building.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I was clear on why.
Yeah. But then the head of the FSB stepped in and cleared things up. He called a press conference and he announced that the bomb in Ryazan was a fake that had been placed there by the FSB as, quote, a test of vigilance, unquote. Yeah. He congratulated the people of Ryazan for their vigilance, and they even put on a little ceremony and gave the phone operator a new color TV as a reward for her vigilance.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though not everybody buys into the accusation that the FSB and the Russian government were involved in this, I have to say that Yeltsin certainly did need some sort of provocation, in order to either be able to declare martial law, cancel the election, or to maybe go to war in Chechnya and sort of change the equation and make his new president more popular, so that he could win, he could stay in that office and protect Yeltsin after Yeltsin left.
This sounds really familiar.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna use quotes when I say 9/11 was an inside job.
Exactly.
This sounds like the same kind of I've got the boogeyman. I'm gonna find his trail.
It's along those lines. The only problem with the 9/11 theories is that
there's a lot of them.
Oh,
I don't even want to start down that road.
But there's not a shred of evidence. But in this case, there is evidence. Yeah, you think?
There is evidence, but I also the FSB operated with such a level of impunity is the word I want to use. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Okay. So it is the right word. Okay. They didn't bother to do anything to hide what they were doing. They just, nobody's going to stop us. Nobody's going to do anything. And they could have been doing something completely unrelated and it got tied in. Do I think that? No. But that's why I'm not 100%
No, you
on
don't.
board with this.
Well, you don't have to be. I mean, it is entirely possible, but the fact of the matter is they have been credibly accused. The Russian government, Vladimir Putin, they have been accused of being involved in these bombings. And some things have happened since then. You remember I mentioned David Satter, the journalist who was living in Russia up until 2013 when he was expelled by the government.
Okay. Because he was saying nasty things about them.
Yeah, he was, and he was researching some stuff like the apartment bombings that they weren't enthusiastic about him researching. And he and several other journalists formed a little committee, and they agreed to work together, share information, and to not let this story die. The other journalists were named Sergei Yashchenkov, Yuri Shafakishin, I'm really murdering this, Anna Polakosho, and Alexander Litvinenko. And so, yeah.
That's where this comes back full circle. Okay.
It does, yeah. And of that committee of journalists, the only one that's still alive is David Satter. Sergei and Anna were both shot to death, and Yuri was poisoned with conventional poison, and unlike our guy Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned.
Wasn't Yuri poisoned with some poison that was known to be used by the KGB for years as a preferred method of poisoning?
Yeah. And
okay.
So
that's why everybody ties it back. Okay.
Yeah, and so this is why I kind of like the Russian government involvement theory, because if these guys are just a bunch of crackpots just running around saying 9/11 was an inside job, or the equivalent, what's the point of murdering them? But if on the other hand,
9/4 was an inside job.
Yeah.
9/4 to 9/24 was an inside job. Just doesn't roll off the tongue. Yeah. Although in Russian maybe it does.
Yeah.
I don't think anything rolls off the tongue in Russian.
All right, but so anyway, it could be anything. Could be the CIA. Could be.
So wait. Slow down here. Back up. You just dropped that, and then you're walking. You just mic dropped this.
Yeah.
Okay, so
bombshell.
So we started out talking about Litvinenko and the fact that he got poisoned with a random bit of plutonium or polonium, that's made up word.
Okay, I'll let you finish.
Okay, and now you've tied this all back to say that he actually was murdered by the Russian Federation for his activities in trying to expose things that were going on based on the 1999 apartment bombings.
Essentially, yeah. I think that just given that everybody that was pursuing this story either wound up, and it wasn't just these four. There were other people who were investigating who wound up getting arrested on bogus charges and locked up.
Oh, I read through a death list on some website, and it's like there's a dozen high-name people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, so it's not just these four either. There's tons of people who were killed or locked up or whatever for asking the wrong questions about the apartment bombings.
Well, and here's the thing about polonium, is that it's pretty obscure.
Yeah.
Isn't that a D&D character? Oh no, that's a paladin.
But the place that it's not so obscure is Russia. They actually use it for coatings to coat certain metals. They don't use it. They use it in the process of coating certain metals. I don't think.
Yeah, they don't coat them in this room.
No, they don't coat it in this. But there's some.
No, you don't want to do that.
Some heat coating. You can use this alpha radiation versus the gamma radiation. That's what makes polonium